All right, we're going to go ahead and start the presentation. This is my presentation on different forms of data and the impact that it has on kids. And primarily, I focused on what we use here at Meredith Middle School in Des Moines. Four of the biggest primary points of data that we use here are standard reference grading, our IEP progress monitoring data, as well as the measurement of academic progress. This is the MAP test. We use that for both English and reading. And then the English Language Proficiency Assessment for the 21st Century, or ELPA. ELPA is our ELL test. We use this to place our ELL population in various classes, as well as to map their progress. I'm going to go through each of these four individually and discuss their impact on our instruction and curriculum here at Des Moines Meredith Middle School. First of all, standard reference grading. This is by far one of the biggest points that we use. About 3 or 4 years ago, I think it was 4 years now, Des Moines completely switched over away from traditional A, B, and C grading to standards reference grading, which basically looks more at the different skills and in the standards. And really it's whether or not you've acquired that skill or you've been able to show proficiency as opposed to just your basic assignment grades. So basically what they've done is they've placed an added emphasis on simply being able to get the skill as opposed to, oh, hey, I nailed it first on the first assignment and then averaging everything out. And one of the best ways that we explain this to parents and anybody that asks questions is it really comes down to, is it more important that the child learns a skill, or is it more important that they were able to do it the first time? And I think, honestly, it was a real big transition for us initially, but since then we've kind of adopted it, and everyone here seems to enjoy it because ultimately it really does come down to whether or not the child has the skill, because that's the important part, not necessarily the grade. We monitor this continuously, and essentially what I mean by that is every assignment can be graded as a body of evidence. You have to have at least 2 bodies of evidence to determine what we call a topic score. And the topic score is basically what you would see on the report card. And it's on a 4-point scale, 1, 2, 3, and 4. 3 is your target, basically. That's the level of proficiency. You can also give half scores. But what we do is by monitoring this continuously and staying up to date on your grade book, it makes it really easy to see progress, especially if you set up your Infinite Campus as chronological. So like the older assignments are off to the right or off to the left. It doesn't really matter which way. But then you can start to see a trend. Basically, are they getting it? Are they not getting it? And what that allows us to do is identify struggling learners for intervention. So it could be reteaching, it could be pull-out groups, it could be, hey, maybe you just needed to retake this particular assessment, or it could just be one little tiny part of the standard as opposed to just the full idea. You're just not understanding it at all. I also really like standard reference grading because of the formative versus the summative. You could formatively assess anything very, very quickly. It's more of a professional judgment for me, so I can look at something and read through it and scan it really quickly. Like for me, I use the formative assessment in SRG. I do warm-up questions every day, and every day there's a warm-up question that deals with the content or what we're working on that particular day. And so I could go through really, really fast and review these and kind of just grade in my head. I might not necessarily put it in the grade book, but I can just, I have a touch screen and a stylus, and on my computer and my OneNote, I can just go right down the line, 2, 3, 2.5, 3.5. And then while doing that, I have a pretty good idea of where we're at as far as a class, and I can know whether or not to go on or something we need to, reteach. From a summative perspective, it lends itself to a summative task. Yes, that might be the last opportunity for a child to show proficiency in class for that particular unit. However, it doesn't mean that's the end of it. Kids pretty much have until the end of the semester or whenever grades are due at the end of the year to show that they've become proficient in a given skill. Now, that also opens up the opportunities for extended class period, like extended day, so after school, before school, at lunch. And I feel like SRG kind of helps that a lot more because, you have a student, especially look at some of our special ed kids that come in and maybe they just tank the first assessment. That doesn't necessarily mean that there's no chance of a really good grade at the end of it, because if you get the skill the day before the end of the unit, then awesome, because that's exactly what we want. And you don't have to worry about your grade being pulled down by 1 or 2 bad assessments or assignments. The next one that we use is IEP progress monitoring. What these are, they are biweekly measures of student academic growth towards their IEP goals. So you look at an IEP could be monitoring, a dozen different things, mostly math, reading, behavior, fluency. There's speech therapy goals. There's a bunch of other ones, and what they are, what progress monitoring is they are legally required assessments, kind of that need to measure the growth of that particular child. So, for example, if a kid's at a 5th grade reading level, they'll take 5th grade level readers and they'll read it and then take some sort of assessment on the back end. And then that data or that particular assessment is scored, and then that data is graphed into the IEP online program that they have. And then what's really nice about that is it graphs it, and so you could very quickly look at the graph and kind of make a determination on whether or not that particular child is making growth towards their goal. So again, if the goal is they need to be at 75% on 5th grade readers and they started out, their baseline was like a 45%, there's a trend line that will show up on the graph and kind of let you know the data point according to the trend line whether or not growth is being made. And if growth is not being made, that's 4 consecutive points below the trend line, then you have to change up your the instruction that's given to that particular student. So that could be more reteaching, small group, maybe differentiating materials a little bit more. Ultimately, it could even be increased minutes or increased accommodations, but those changes would have to wait most of the time until you write a new IEP or if you amend the IEP in any given way. Now, on the flip side, if the data shows that they're making really, really good progress, where you have 4 data points above the trend line, then you can start to look at maybe taking away some of those interventions and seeing if they can continue to grow on their own, or you might even need to amend an IEP to change the goal to be more stringent. So IEP progress monitoring comes into play when we are lesson planning, simply because especially like a co-taught class, that special ed teacher can come to a planning meeting and show, okay, Johnny's really making great strides. I don't think we need to pull him out for this particular portion. Let's leave him in the mainstream or in the main class and see how he does. Or on the flip side, this person's really, really struggling. I think I'm going to differentiate this a little bit more. Let's try this. And then that data helps drive that planning process with teachers. The next one is the measurement of academic progress. This is the MAP test, and this is something that the District of Des Moines has put a lot of time and energy and money behind. This has replaced some of the other different tests that we were using. We do this 3 times a year. We do it in the fall, the winter, and the spring. And this goes right into our school improvement plan, goal writing. A lot of our goals now are written based on our MAP data. And what's really nice is MAP gives you a wide variety of data. It breaks down not only grade level achievement on certain topics, it breaks it down by topic, but also like college readiness. It can tell you that a 7th grade kid is not on track to be college ready as far as math or reading are concerned. The other thing that it does is it allows us to break down all of this information and that data by population. So we can really start to see the differences in achievement between white students and black students, or ELL students, or boys versus girls, and what that does is we can really identify those particular students or those populations that need increased interventions. Our big push across the District of Des Moines is really working with young men of color, and for example, at Meredith last year, they had our 7th grade boys were about 21% percentage points below their white counterparts in math readiness, as far as college readiness is concerned in math. So that tells us that we need to look at that population and be able to provide them increased interventions. That shows up in our instruction by we have pull-out groups, specifically looking at students that, those young men of color. We've also used this to identify activities groups. So we started a brother-to-brother group that works with a lot of these young men and emphasizes academics and kind of looks at their entire life. But a lot of those students were identified simply based on their MAP scores. So we use this in a wide variety of different ways, but it's basically replaced even Iowa assessments as our benchmark assessment for the district. And the last one is our English language proficiency assessment for 21st century learners. Oh, just noticed I have a nice little typo there. That's wonderful. Our ELPA test is done a couple times a year with our ELL population. And really what it does is it just kind of maps their proficiency in the English language. And what that does is it helps us place these students into varying levels of ELL. So when we get a new ELL student that comes over, like whether it's a refugee or somebody else, they usually end up in the IELC, which is our immersion ELC class, immersion ELL class. And those are actually at different satellites, schools programs across the district, and so that particular student is going to work through the IELC until they have been able to show a certain mastery of the English language that would allow them to be moved into your normal regular ELL classes. And then ultimately your ELPA test is how we staff people out of ELL as well, and or just getting them into mainstream classes as much as possible. The ELPA test is one that I think most schools kind of overlook. I know our ELL teachers are incredibly passionate, and they've done several PDs for us for building wide, just to be able to educate the rest of the staff on the impact of the ELPA test and how that moves their instruction. And I think that PD has helped us, as far as the gen ed teachers, figure out, okay, these students are working, they're moving up, hopefully they'll be able to make it into our class. Before that, we had no idea. Like, kids would just show up in some of our classes. Like my class, I have some pretty challenging ELL students simply because their mastery of the English language is just not there yet, let alone their computer skills. So their ELPA score really actually helps me identify which ones can do it, which ones are really struggling with it, and then I use that particular data to when I do seating charts in student groupings, because I know that I need to have somebody that's strong in the English language that can also explain this back in maybe a language that makes sense to kids. So here at Meredith, we have over 30 languages spoken building wide, so being able to have student-to-student kind of translators is really helpful, especially when you're looking at student groupings and things of that nature. So, conclusions. The wonderful thing about data, and we now in Des Moines have obviously a ton of data. Our Infinite Campus is filled with Iowa assessments, SRG, ELPA, MAP scores, all of that. And what that allows us to do is give a multifaceted approach to instruction. So no more like this is just what we're doing, hope they get it. It's we can tailor that instruction to meet the needs of various learners, and that it all comes from that data, because that data really does inform your decisions and drives your instruction, or really should, and hopefully that's happening building wide. And the other thing that it does is it can help us close that achievement gap. So now we know there are gaps in achievement across different populations. So like I said earlier, whether it's black, white, ELL, special ed, boys versus girls, all of that. The more we know and the better we can identify gaps, the more we can tailor instruction to meet the needs of those particular students and hopefully be able to close that gap. So that's all I have for you today. Hope that you guys enjoyed that data. And yep.